Please welcome the former Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Bob Rae, with his presentation, There is a Path Forward and it is called Respectful Partnership. S'il vous plaît, veuillez accueillir l'ancien Premier ministre de l'Ontario, l'Honorable Bob Rae, qui nous offre la présentation Le respect dans le partenariat, un sentier devant.
Wow, that's quite the intro. Thank you very much. It's great to be here this morning. I have the pleasure of being your first speaker, which is always a fascinating challenge as we shake the cobwebs out of our hair. I know the mayor is coming on very shortly. I want to express my thanks to him and to the Council of Greenstone for once again organizing this meeting and this conference, and want to say how much I'm looking forward to having a chance to chat with you and to answer some of your questions about what I'm involved with and what the First Nations are doing from our perspective. And then, as I said, to be happy to answer your questions and comments. I'm also very pleased to be on the platform with my good friend Ovid Mercredi, with whom I've done work in the past, and look forward to working with him again in the future. At the last conference, we were, I think, all of us in a certain frame of mind about the imminence of certain projects and what was going to happen and what needed to take place. I thought what I would try to do today is to put some of that in perspective from where I sit, and also to report to you on the amount of progress that in fact we have made in getting us to what I think is a better place. I don't need to tell an audience in Thunder Bay or an audience of people who live in the north about the nature of the mining industry, except to say that it is subject to enormous fluctuations and changes. I don't know how many of you were at the PDAC meeting earlier. Many of you been there? How many were at the PDAC meeting earlier? A few, not a great many, but a few. Just to say that at that PDAC meeting, I had a number of meetings, and it's 25,000 people coming from around the world who are coming in to meet and talk and gather for the better part of a week. And in the discussions that we had, it was very clear to me that the mining industry itself is going through a major moment of transition. I think the best way to describe it is that we were in a period up to about a year or two ago of many companies carrying on major mega projects around the world. Mega projects involving the expenditure of billions and billions of dollars. The most notable of which, of course, was the Barrick project in Peru, which was supposed to be one of the greatest engineering feats in the world, building a mine literally at the top of the world on the Andes, the border between Peru and Chile. And the cost overruns of this project were just simply humongous. And as many of you will have read from looking at the change of the board at Barrick, Mr. Monk's decision to retire, and a whole bunch of things have all happened together, indicating that in that particular company, they've made a very tough board decision to say, that project is frozen. We're reviewing everything. No more mega projects. No more multi-billion dollars. Let's just focus on what we know how to do, and let's do it better. Now, that is partly a reflection of two things. One is the cost of projects, how to control those costs, how to manage those costs, how to de-risk those projects, how to take the uncertainties out of those projects, and how to ensure that once a decision is made to proceed, that getting from there to the point of production is going to be done in a way that where the costs are predictable. Many of you will have been affected and impacted by the decision that Cliffs made. And these decisions are made in a marketplace where prices are uncertain. Nobody knows what the price of gold or the price of iron ore or the price of chromite is going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 years. People don't know those things. So companies are constantly in a position of saying we have to de-risk these projects. We have to bring them into line with our own financial capacity. We can't bet the store on any one single project. And I know that, when a project is put on hold, as the Cliffs project was put on hold, that there's a tendency to say, well, it's the government of Ontario's fault or the government of Canada's fault, or even in some cases to say it's the First Nations' fault. But folks, that just isn't the case. It just isn't true. These are the function of the system, the economic system in which we're living, in which Cliffs can't dictate what the price of iron ore is. Essentially, an iron ore company like Cliffs is tremendously dependent on getting a price for its products that increases its revenue. And if the price is constantly being depressed and constantly going down, then Cliffs is going to be looking at everything it's doing and saying, how do we keep this under control so we can be in a better position going forward in the out years? So when the Cliffs decision was made, there was, of course, the inevitable pointing of fingers one direction or another. And I'm not pointing any fingers anywhere because I think it's completely the wrong approach to take. There's a few things that we know about the far north of this province, and we should remind people what they are. The first thing we know is that whatever exploration is taking place and whatever post-exploration and serious prospecting and assessment that's taking place is showing that there are ore bodies in the far north which have tremendous, not only potential, but tremendous reality. The ore is there. The minerals are there. But there are some things we have to recognize. The first is that where they are is far from any easy access or infrastructure. They're not far from where people are living, and I'll go into that in a moment, but where those people have been living for the last several thousand years also does not have any infrastructure or roads or access. And finally, although the treaties have been signed, in this case Treaty 9, between the province, the federal government, and the First Nations, it's fair to say that there is a strong difference of opinion between the First Nations and the Crown as to what exactly is the meaning of those treaties. From the perspective of the Crown, the treaties, from their perspective, mean that the communities have given up all of their rights and claim and title to any land other than the land to which they have immediate access, and other land which they use in a traditional way, hunting, trapping, lands that are in their, quote, traditional territory. But from the Aboriginal perspective, it's important to know that the view of the First Nations is that they never gave up rights and title to their traditional territory. They simply agreed to share it. And that this process of sharing has not gone, from their perspective, has not gone very well. So that conditions on reserve are very difficult. Housing is poor, there's no work, there's no jobs. Traditional hunting and trapping does not produce the revenues that it once did. The old Hudson's Bay infrastructure, the Northwest Company infrastructure, it's all gone, it's all disappeared. And conditions are very difficult. For those who haven't been to a fly-in community, I can only tell you it's like going to a very different place than what we see in urban centers across the country. So the prospect of major infrastructure and the prospect of major development is something that, at the very least, needs to be discussed and worked through with the people who've been living and working on that land for thousands of years. And there's a whole series of court decisions that emphasize that the Crown has a duty to act honorably, that the Crown has an obligation to act in a way that shows its respect for First Nations, and that the Crown has a duty to consult and to accommodate the interests of First Nations. That's the law. It wasn't clearly the law 30 years ago, but it is clearly the law today. And there's no getting around that law. So, where are we today? Well, about 9 months ago, in the month of June, the government appointed Frank Iacobucci, and the First Nations had already, the 9 First Nations around the area known as the Ring of Fire had asked me to be their lead negotiator. And since that time, we have been engaged in a process. And the process is one that has to be based in each community. Because the Indian Act, which was passed by Parliament, not by the First Nations, but it's a law of Parliament, has given the authority within the First Nations to each community. There are 645 First Nations communities that are established under the Indian Act. And that's where the power lies. That's where the authority lies. And so the decision of those 9 First Nations to get together in itself is a remarkable achievement, because it doesn't always happen. Because essentially 9 First Nations are saying, let's work together within the region known as Matawa and see if we can't move forward with the government in creating a regional process. A regional process that will not replace the rights of the First Nations, but a regional process that will recognize that there are some things that need to be done together and can't be done separately as well. When a proponent puts forward, has completed their exploration and has completed their assessment of what in fact is in the ground, that proponent has to go to the Government of Ontario for approval to begin an environmental assessment. 2 companies, Cliffs and Noront, have put forward to the government have put forward proposals. Cliffs has said their proposal is on hold. Noront is asking the government to say, we'd like to proceed with our project. We'd like our project to be assessed and considered. And what the Government of Ontario is now doing is talking to the First Nations and saying, what process should we follow to assess the Noront proposal? So the first thing that will need to be discussed is the nature of the environmental monitoring, the environmental assessment process that will go on. Now, it used to be that a company would do their homework, what they thought was their homework, and they would then get a coterie, an army of consultants and lawyers and environmental folks to write reports for them, and they'd put all these reports in a box, and sometimes it'd be 2,000, sometimes it'd be 3,000, sometimes it'd be 4,000 pages, and they'd send that box to the band office, and they'd say, here's our proposal, can we please have your comments in a couple of weeks? And the communities in Matawa are saying there's no way that this is going to happen this time this way. We need to have a face-to-face process. We need to have a human process where people go into communities and explain to communities what is being proposed and ask the communities for their response and give the communities an opportunity to use their traditional knowledge, to consult with elders, to talk to people, and to get on the ground and say, well, this is an area that's part of our traditional burial ground. This is an area that's been used as a community gathering for thousands of years. These are the things that we know. And this is how the water flows, and this is where the water goes, and this is where the fish are, and this is what the impact will be. And we're asking the government of Ontario to use that knowledge and to bring the First Nations into a process. That's the first thing. The second thing is that any mine, it sounds ridiculously simple, right? But there's a couple of things that everybody should remember about the engineering of these projects. One is you have to be able to get people there to work. And the other one is you have to be able to get the ore out of the ground, and you have to be able to get the ore to market somehow. And if you got no roads and you got no railway, you got to have a plan as to, well, how are you going to do that? How's that going to get done? And in the process of mining itself, again, we can make it as difficult or as simple as we want. You put a shovel in the ground and you have earth on your shovel. Where are you going to put the earth? And if you pile the earth up, what happens if the wind blows? And what happens if it rains and snows and the leachate goes down and it goes into a river system or a water system? Where does it go then? And by the way, what's in that leachate? What's there? What are we talking about? Has it got arsenic in it? Has it got mercury in it? Has it got chromite? What's in that stuff? And then if it's a big open pit mine that you're building in the middle of a swamp, of a bog, which in the summertime is mostly water and the wintertime is ice, particularly this winter, how do we deal with all the water that's still going to be there? Where do we pump it out? And if we pump the water out, where does it go? And what effect does that have on the water table? And what effect does that have on the water flow? And what effect does that have on the fishery? Because when you talk about the fishery, you're talking about a fishery that has been a way of life for thousands of years. You can't just walk in and destroy it. So there are issues. And even if you're the most, biggest believer in the project, you say it's got to happen, it's great, you got to say, yeah, but you've got to be able to assess how it's going to be done. It's got to be a process. And it can't just be a bunch of government experts coming in saying, yeah, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay. Because the First Nations are not going to accept being left on the margins anymore. They're not going to accept that. It isn't going to happen. They have to be involved. And they have to be involved in saying, well, if you're going to build a road for a mine, we'd like you to consider what kind of infrastructure you're going to build for us, because we don't have any either. We don't have a way of getting. We fly in. You fly in. We take the winter road, 14 hours from Webequie to Thunder Bay. And you can only do that 4 months a year. 8 months, food costs are huge. Milk costs a ton, bread costs a ton. There's no comparison in terms of where things are. So if you're going to break down the isolation, let us know. And by the way, producing electricity from a diesel generator is very inefficient, very costly, highly polluting, very unreliable. We don't have access to good electricity. And by the way, our kids don't have access to the internet. Going to a school, I was in school yesterday, and I said to the teacher, I said, what's the code? She said, what do you mean? I said, what's the code for the Wi-Fi? She says, oh, don't worry about it. Wi-Fi never works around here. But think about it. When the kids come to school here for grades 7, 8, and 9, and 10 and 11, they're already behind. And so we got to look at not just the physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure. What are we going to do to make sure that people are able to take advantage of the opportunities if and when they come? How do we get people trained? How do we make sure that there's actually going to be money in the pockets of people that actually will benefit them and their families? They can provide for themselves and provide for their families. And finally, you know, we've never done it in this province where we've said, look, there's going to be revenue sharing, and the revenue sharing from the money that's taken in by the mining activity is going to be shared with the communities where we're allowing this activity to take place. And that is something that needs to happen because, and I know hope I've got your attention here, in Greenstone needs a good land base to do its job, to have a land base that allows it to collect taxes. And it needs revenue streams. It needs revenue streams to be able to do well. Otherwise, all you're going to do is go down to Toronto with a begging bowl and say, you know, we need more money. That's all the First Nations are asking for, is a land base and a revenue stream. They're saying, look, we are tired of living on handouts from the government of Canada, from the government of Ontario. We don't want to live this way anymore. We want a chance to participate in the economy, the real economy that's coming. Economy is coming here. So how are we going to get our fair share of the benefits from this so that it doesn't just all flow away and be gone and disappear into the wind? And then 30, 40 years later, all we're left with is a wreck of a mine site, no way of remediating it, no money to do so, no training, nobody's benefited. Oh yeah, and there was a camp there that all the white guys came up and got the jobs, and that was the end of it. That's not a good model of development. That's a terrible model of development, which we shouldn't have. So what we've put on the table in our discussions with the government is not outlandish or unreasonable. It's based on the premise that there's got to be something in here for First Nations that allows real conditions on reserve to improve, make sure people have jobs and have work and have access to that, and gets us to a better place. That's really what people are asking. I can only tell you that we're making extremely good progress in that regard. We are working first on a regional framework agreement, which will, in a sense, set the table for those particular discussions. And that I believe the table will be set very, very soon. And as we then go to the next phase, phase 2, we'll get into more detailed discussions about each one of these questions. And I'm satisfied that both sides have been negotiating in good faith and working hard. We have our days, we have our moments, but we get there. That's the nature of the process. And I know that some people are very frustrated. They say, well, you know, I mean, because, look, you know, the mining business is notorious for raising hopes and expectations. Guys come in, there's a lot of exploration activity, people get all excited, they say, oh, it's going to be this, and there's a rumor that this is that, and people go and they flutter and they buy a few shares of X. I mean, I'm sure many people here have lots of share certificates in their basement somewhere or in a drawer, thinking about what's going to come in, what ship is going to happen, how's it going to go. Folks, this has got to be based on a stable infrastructure where we are de-risking, to use an economic phrase, we're de-risking the investment all the time, and we're creating answers to questions, and we're doing it step by step, and we're doing it in the right way. We've got to improve the physical and social infrastructure of the far north of this province. It has to be done. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of good decisions. It can't be done only for one sector of the economy. It has to be done for everybody. You can't leave people out. You can't just have logging roads and mining roads and say to the communities, you're out of luck. That isn't going to happen. You can't just have hydro being designed for the mining exploration and nothing being done for the communities. That isn't going to happen. And I think it's in that spirit of partnership that we've gone forward. But insisting at a place at the table and insisting that things must be done differently this time. So let me just come back to the reality, to the world that's out there. You have thousands of people in the far north of this province who've been living with boil water advisories for years on end, although they're supposed to have clean running water in their communities, where the schools are being funded at around 50% of what schools are being funded even in Moosonee and Moose Factory, where doctors come in once a month, dentists come in maybe once every 2 months, where there's nurses that are there, but any serious problem means people have to get flown out, medevaced out, taken right away, including having a baby, where there are serious social issues and serious challenges facing individuals. People who haven't had work and haven't had jobs and haven't had steady incomes their entire lives, who are still dealing with the residual trauma of having been told for 3 generations through the residential schools that their culture and their way of life and their language and who they were had absolutely no value, and that the only way they could succeed in society was by becoming somebody else. Where even this day, even in our enlightened country, people who come into town brush up against daily examples of racism, daily examples of people making fun of who they are, daily examples of people saying, you'll never get anywhere. This is what we're overcoming. And it's going to take time. It's going to take real determination. It's going to take a lot of effort, but it will be done. And there's no reason, we got to avoid these big mood swings of optimism, pessimism. We are building something now. We're starting in a process of building, and we're doing it better. We're doing it differently than we've done before. We're doing it better. It's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. The alternative is a lot more court cases, a lot more fighting, a lot more demonstrations, a lot more uncertainty. Nobody wants to go there. It's not the place these things are going to get settled best. But we've got to move forward in a positive way. So thank you very much for listening this morning. I appreciate the chance to be with you. If there are a couple of questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I don't want to eat into anybody else's time. So thank you very much for the chance to start the conference off this morning. I appreciate it a great deal. And if I may say so, thanks to some of my bosses who are here today. I can see some chiefs sitting at the table in the back there. I hope I haven't let you down too badly. Thank you very much. Good to be with you. Thank you. Miigwech. Are there any questions or things that people want to say? Yeah. Can you just tell me who you are so I know where you're coming from?
My name is Sandy Olat. I live here in Thunder Bay. And I'd just like to know, when is the road going in?
I can't answer that question. First of all, we don't know which road might go in. As you know, there are 2 roads that have been discussed. An east-west road that would go from the mine site west and then down to Pickle Lake. And the other road is the one that would go north from Nakina and Arrowland north to the mine site. Both roads have been discussed. Neither road has been approved. We're just going to get started on the discussion of which roads are being proposed and how we get through the environmental assessment for that. And we're going to be starting that process this spring. So we should have some better answers for you in a few months, but it's going to take a bit of time before that decision is made.
Okay.
I think you have to understand, sir, that either road involves quite a lot of major environmental factors, bridges that are going to be built over rivers that have never had bridges built over them, a lot of it going over a substantial wetland. So there's quite a lot of issues that have to be dealt with and understood. But we all understand the sense of urgency which is being felt by the communities. Right.
discussing things that should have been answered a long time ago. If a road is of benefit to people in the community, then where's the plan?
Well, I don't disagree with you that a lot of things could have been done earlier that haven't been done. But I can only tell you from a First Nations perspective, our concern is to see that whatever infrastructure is built is one that's going to leave a lasting benefit to the communities that have not had any road access for a long period of time. I'll come to you in a second. It's over there.
Hi, Mr. Ray. Thank you for your words today. I'm Jordan Hatton, Director of Lands and Resources with Bingwini-Ashi Anishinaabeg, Sandpoint First Nation. Just wondering on your thoughts about resource revenue sharing on a grander scale. I think some communities outside of the Ring of Fire area look at the process kind of with envy because we're trying to get that process started in the Robinson Superior Treaty. So I'm wondering if you can speak to resource revenue sharing on a greater scale outside of the Ring of Fire.
That's up to the province. The province has accepted having a discussion with us on this issue. If the province says, well, we need to broaden that discussion to include others, that would be their decision. But what we are very determined to see is that whatever broader discussion takes place is not an endless discussion. The number of models available are not hugely complex. We did it on casino revenue sharing across the province. We managed to get it done. There was some litigation when governments changed the rules. I won't mention the names of those governments. But when the Harris government came in and changed the rules, it upset the apple cart. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. But we're not opposed to, it's up to the province to set the policy framework. We're simply saying for the purposes of our negotiation, this issue has to be on the table because we can't see how we can IBAs are important. The industrial benefit agreements that are signed between companies and First Nations are very important, but they're not a substitute for good public policy and policy that's based on some real principle. Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask you about the environmental movement. I remember getting the pro-Brunton report. This is a global issue, but it impacts very much, what's going on in Canada. And pro-Brunton said exactly that it's actually about health. And I just wanted to know how many people understand Agenda 21 of the United Nations and how much that's got to do in the back rooms of what's going on in development in Canada, considering the big focus on sustainability.
I think the focus has to be on sustainability. And I think that one of the things that's important to realize is that some of the agreements, for example, that Canada has signed, for example, on the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Canada has now signed, is very much, we're saying to the government of Canada, and the government of Ontario, these are your obligations that you have agreed to internationally that you must now uphold in our own province. Secondly, on the sustainability issue, I think sustainability is everything. I don't think you can have development in the far north that isn't up to a higher standard of sustainability than we've ever seen before. We're now remediating some of the worst examples of where we didn't start remediating mining 100 years ago. And I don't think anybody wants us to repeat the mistakes that we made 150 years ago or 100 years ago or even 50 years ago and make them today. On the other hand, I think when I talk to people in the mining industry, I get a strong sense that the whole question of the environment and corporate social responsibility has changed a lot. And I think the attitudes that people have about their responsibilities to the environment, their responsibilities to the local population, their responsibilities to the political authorities, I think those attitudes have changed a lot in my lifetime, which, by the way, is 65 years. So that's, over that time, I think we've seen quite a lot of change.
Just one thing, because nobody seems to know anything about Agenda 21 in particular. It's never in the press or any kind of media. And I think everybody should know about it because we're talking about sort of deindustrialization of the Western world, and that doesn't kind of fit in with any mining
Well, I don't think, I mean, I think there's an issue that we need to talk about as a society, is to say, is it possible to do some activities in a sustainable way? And I think one of the things you want to be able to do in an environmental assessment process is be able to ensure that it meets the toughest possible standards. And my own view is that having First Nations at the table and as part of that discussion will, I think, bring the sustainability argument to the fore. And there will also be an opportunity for others, like the Wildlands League and other environmental organizations, to have a say about what the process will be like. And I think that's something we need to do. So thank you for your question, sir.
It's exciting. First of all, I'm Roy Michano,
I know who you are.
former chief of Big River, and now an elder with the Union of Ontarian and Robinson Superior Chiefs. It's exciting to pop in here because yesterday I was supposed to be gone somewhere else, but I got a free ticket to come and have lunch here.
It's not like you, Roy, to take a free
But
ticket.
anyway, as I walked in, I heard a lot of talk about exciting things for the woman. I think that's so great. Yesterday I got a call about our chief here from Fort William who made a good statement about treaty rights,
right,
and how important that we ought not to let those things wasted away. Clearly, as the lady spoke about the woman, I believe clearly the women are an important part of Anishinaabe country. The women are the keepers of water, and clearly the water must not be destroyed anymore. It cannot be destroyed. We are fighting with Hemlo Gold and now Stillwater, and by golly, they're gonna hear us. But clearly I feel it's important that the First Nation members here make sure that the water is not destroyed. We are here for a long, long while, and when the mine is all done, we will still be there. Clearly, I believe there are a lot of young people that are up and wanting to get involved, but nobody listens to them. And I believe the chiefs that are along with the Ring of Fire listen to the women and listen to the youth. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Roy, thank you. One more question?
Thank you. My name's Dean Cormani. I'm from Waterman Lake First Nation. I remember you from your earlier days. You used to come there with the old Jack Stokes when you were before you
I remember that trip
premier.
very well to Waterman, yeah.
A lot of times. We're in Treaty 9 territory.
Yes.
Where all these activities taking place. Undeveloped area, as you explained clearly in your comments. Undeveloped means there's nothing there. I mean, in terms of infrastructure, education, jobs, and what have you. But we're there. And when our people are starting to assert is their thoughts on their Treaty 9. And starting to question what are its benefits for us. And I'm glad that the group of 9 Matawa communities are looking at that question on their own. But as you know, Treaty 9 represents about 49 communities. And my question was, Matawa has negotiator, Ontario has their negotiator, but the Treaty 9 reps don't have a negotiator at the table. And I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts about is there room for a Treaty 9 negotiator or representative to be there at the table?
Well, let me just say, first of all, Dean, on a personal level, I remember my trip to Waterman very well, and I certainly remember my association with Jack Stokes extremely well. He was probably the person more than anybody else who helped begin my education about Northern Ontario, and not just the First Nations communities, but the whole of the North. And it's been a relationship that I've really valued over the last 35, 40 years of my working life, and I've really appreciated it, and I treasure his memory. We talk about, in First Nations communities, we talk about the teachings of the elders. But he was a real elder. He taught me a lot about the process, and I'll always be walking in his footsteps. I think that the Treaty 9 First Nations should not see the Matawa process as any kind of a threat. It's not a threat to anybody. It's a basis of a discussion. If others want to broaden that discussion, if others want to breathe more life into the treaty in other ways, in other ways of thinking about it, I would encourage that to happen. One of the things that has happened in Canada is that it's interesting that the most exciting and most advanced developments in self-government in Quebec, in British Columbia, in Yukon, in Northwest Territories, and in Nunavut, and in Labrador have all happened in the last 30 years where there were no historic treaties. So what does that tell us? It tells us we have to renew our own treaties because the treaties are out of date and their interpretation is out of date, and we have to breathe life into the treaties. So I think what we're doing in Matawa is helping to do that, is helping to show that the way in which the treaties have been interpreted in the past by governments is not sufficient, and that there's an increasing gap between the resource development in other jurisdictions and in the province of Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and eastern British Columbia. And the numbered treaties, and even the Robinson Superior Treaty, which is a little bit different in its wording, they still have a real challenge in convincing governments that you can't simply do business the old way. And we need to look hard at where we are and breathe new life into these relationships, because that's where we've got a long way to go. You compare and contrast the conditions in western Quebec, northwestern Quebec, with the conditions in northeastern Ontario or northwestern Ontario, and you'll be shocked to see the difference. Shocked. It's because of the difference in policy, and it's something that we need to look very hard at rebuilding. Thank you for the question.
I'm just going to make this quick, but I guess Bob must be a politician, because for sure we were running on overtime, but we really appreciate it. I just want to do a little presentation here as the Mayor of Greenstone. Thank you very much, Bob. This is a representation of what we stand for, growing our roots together, and it's all about trust, and what I'm seeing here today is definitely a sign of it. So thank you very much for being with us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're good.
And I would just ask quickly, I know we're kind of running out of time, but as the Mayor of Greenstone, I feel very proud right now, because I know that we have a lot of chiefs here from around the area, and we're sitting here, and I don't think that everybody knows who they are. Would it be a problem for you to stand up so we can recognize who are the chiefs from I know that Matawa chiefs, I see a few of them that I've spoken to that are from the Matawa group. Would you mind standing and maybe giving them a big hand? And all the other chiefs, if there's any other chiefs also, I would really appreciate it. For me, this is a very important moment to be able to see that we're here and we're working together. And we're building trust, and that's what this is all about. It's so important for us in Northern Ontario. We stand strong. So thank you very much, and we'll leave it with that.